Hey, James Carville. Nice to see you. We're very excited to be here with you to talk about your new documentary directed by Matt Turnauer called Carville Winning is Everything Stupid. Um, and not to mention, we'll have to talk about the election, which is now, gosh, less than a month away, James, on November 5th. So, first, let's talk about the documentary. What made you want to dip your toe in the water again? I remember when you were in the war room way back when, which was obviously the 1992 Bill Clinton presidential campaign. So why'd you want to go there again?
Well, it wasn't actually my idea. Somebody, uh, Susan McHugh, who was Senator Reid's chief of staff when she was 30 years old, were having dinner, and she said, I started a war room when I was a student at Rutgers. It just made me want to get into politics, and I think we should do another documentary about you, and maybe some people will want to get into politics. And I thought it was flattering, and I said, great idea. And then next thing you know, she'd gotten to direct it, and she said, we got to go out to California and New York and raise money for this. And so I started getting into the project, and it was, in one sense, it was flattering, and in another sense, I think there's some real messages in this film. So I'm just glad to be part of it.
Well, what would you say is the overall message, James?
That politics is a noble business, that people are in it, and we've so demeaned the whole idea of politics, and not just the people that run for office or work in campaigns, but people who cover it, or journalists who cover politics, people involved in it, people who volunteer, or people who work the polls on election day. And and hopefully what this movie will do is inspire other young people to get involved in some aspect of public life in the country. That's the hope of it anyway.
Let me ask you about some of the moments in the documentary. It spends a lot of time highlighting the closeness, the extreme closeness of your relationship with your mom, Lucille, or Miss Nippy, as she was known. Tell us about your mom and why she had such an important influence on you, James.
Well, of course, Katie, you knew her because you interviewed her in
I
1990
know.
show. She was I think one of the things a couple of people have texted me is they watched it with their wives, and several people have commented that they think it has strong feminist undertones in the movie. That I was, in a large sense, shaped by strong women. My mother, my wife, my sister was in it, also my other sisters. And my mother was a very kind of dynamic person who had a lot of confidence in herself, and obviously had a lot of confidence in me. And she was a Cajun, grew up Valls Parish. My mother could speak French before she could speak English, but she was always a one of the great things about her. We didn't get in the movie. It was known as Miss Nippy, and she was actually named after a tramp. So, like during the recession, she'd bring the tramp food from the house, and the tramp's name was Nip. And I've always been kind of proud of the fact, some people's moms are named after queens of royalty or something. It's kind of cool when my mother was named after a hobo.
Which I think tramp and hobos are,
I'm
those
saying, I think
words
it's the same thing. Everybody's
aren't
itinerates and
exactly in the current lexicon, James,
no,
right?
no. But during the Depression, it was pretty prevalent that they'd ride the trains and look for food,
And
and
she also sold encyclopedias to help support your family, and she was really good at it. She clearly had very high emotional intelligence. Do you think that you got your ability to kind of read people and I don't know, sell ideas to people? Is that from your mom, you think?
well, she I thought sales was a high calling. She was always proud to be a salesman. She believed, and those encyclopedias were good. She sold World Book encyclopedia, and they were a very good product back then. If you were growing up in rural Louisiana, you didn't have, there was no internet.
Oh my God, I remember our world books. They were blue and they were at the bottom shelf of our house in the den. And I used to sit on the floor and go through those world books all the time.
Yeah, then so I think she believed in the product, and she liked selling. She enjoyed people, and I think I did learn from that. an appreciation of salesmanship. And I did. There was a lesson there. But I mean, the main thing my mother did for me is she convinced me that I was the smartest person and that she was the luckiest person on earth that she was my mother. And you know, if a child can grow up with that kind of validation, I think it you know, really helps. I don't know how to say it, but you know, I
Uh,
grew up very self-confident because of my mother.
and her gift of unconditional love. What about your dad? I know that he insisted when you were growing up that you were the luckiest people in the world,
Right.
not that you were, quote, living in some shithole on the Mississippi River. Tell us about him and how
He
he
was
shaped it.
he was a boxer at LSU, and he was my dad was a very kind man. He ran a general store, and he was the kind of postmaster, and he had a real influence because when I was growing up, it was everything was racial, everything was about, you know, civil rights and stuff, and he would never allow us to call anybody a derogatory name. And that seems so common, that just seems natural courtesy today. But when I grew up, it was people would demean black people or Jewish people or Italian people or anything else. And I think he had a very calming and he loved my mother, and he was like the fact that, you know, we needed the money. We had 8 kids, and you know, so I mean, I think but he just worshipped her, and he was a very. My mother was much more outgoing. I mean, she drove faster than he did. You know, she was more aggressive than he was, but and he was a very well liked guy. You know, that's all I can say. He had a lot of friends, and he was a good athlete. He was. I was born at Fort Benning. He was an Army officer in World War II. So there was a lot, but he was the kind of common influence in the family, and my mother was a kind of tornado. He was the kind
But
of.
but it sounds like you were very loved by both your mom and your dad, and having 8 kids and growing up in that environment. You were lucky, James.
Yeah, yeah, and I had 7 brothers and sisters, and we're all, you know, unfortunately, like any big family, we've lost some. But yeah, we were lucky, and I didn't realize, you know, it was kind of Carville. We go back and look at the movie and go, gee whiz. And I thought I was the luckiest guy in the world. I thought I felt sorry for people that lived on the Upper East Side of Beverly Hills. I mean, these people don't have any fun. And, you know, my dad would drive around and we'd see some rich person's house, and he'd say, well, you know, they're not happy. I said, well, I wish I had that many bicycles. Maybe I'd be. He had this kind of myth that everybody, we were the happiest, most blessed people in the world. And you know, that was just the way that he looked at the world. He thought he had the best kids. He thought he had the most charming, smart, beautiful wife, and he was just a guy that just thought he was the luckiest guy in the world. In some ways, maybe I look back on it, maybe he was.
You know what? It sounds as if he really modeled great behavior for you and your siblings in terms of treating Black people with respect and dignity. And I know you grew up in Carville, Louisiana. Your grandfather was the postmaster, and he changed the names. He thought it would keep the mail from getting lost. It was first known as Island, Louisiana. But you there was a large population, a large Black population growing up in Carville. And other than your dad, how do you think that experience influenced your political ideology, your leanings, your whole life philosophy in a way?
Well, okay, it had to, because it was probably when I grew up. You understand, we're also the home of the movie, the home of the largest treatment for Hansen's disease, which most people know as leprosy. So, not, as I pointed out, if there were 1,000 people in Carville, which 400 had leprosy and 550 were poor, the poor blacks. So I'm always kind of amused when I see people talk about marginalized people. I didn't know anyone basically that wasn't a marginalized person, and yeah, I think at some level I became active in politics when I was young because I kind of thought that black people were getting a bum deal, and I became a Democrat at a pretty early age. And I identified mostly with civil rights, and I think it's obviously a work in progress. I live in a city I live in a majority black city. I kind of like that. I don't like being around all the people that are just like me. It's never been. I didn't grow up like that, and I was young in a place that wasn't like that, and I'm gonna die in a place it's not like that, and I'm pretty pleased about it.
You were not really successful in your career, James, until you were about 40. You were struggling early on. So you were a bit of a late bloomer, but then everything changed for you when you worked on Bob Casey's winning campaign when he ran for governor of Pennsylvania back in 1986. Why did everything click at that moment? Because I think that was, if there's a before and after for you professionally, that is the turning point.
You know, it's a. I think I didn't realize it, but because of life experiences I had, I think it made me a better understanding of politics and other people. And one of the things in the movie that got me to thinking was when the whole draft and with Bill Clinton, and he didn't want to be drafted, and
Mm-hmm.
served during the Vietnam War. I didn't go, but I was in, and people had very complicated feelings about that war, and they weren't going to blame him. There were people I knew in the Marine Corps that said, "Man, you don't want to go over there. You didn't lost anything. That's stupid. I mean, what are we doing there?" And it was a good question, and it was true. And I think at various times you don't realize it. You're not successful. When I first started dating my wife, somebody broke into. I had like a basement apartment that had a Murphy bed, and they actually just defecated on the floor because I didn't have anything for them to steal.
Oh,
They told the whole couple to go in there, and I didn't have anything. and um, and my wife always laughs about that. Uh, and I didn't. I guess the other thing was because I had such a huge family and I had so much emotional support. It didn't bother me that I didn't have. I was financially, kind of a break-even guy at 45. Um, so I think that having that kind of family structure gave me confidence and perseverance to sort of go on. I really do.
and then when you worked on, as I said, Bob Casey's campaign, and he won the gubernatorial race, things changed. And of course, soon after that, I mean, this is when you became a household name, James. This is when I got to know you when you were working on Bill Clinton's presidential campaign in 1992. Do you remember the first time you met him?
I do, and we had a big streak. We had Casey, and then guy from Kentucky, Wallace Wilkinson. I think we started with 3 interviews. It was a huge upset.
Right,
Altenberg was a very vulnerable incumbent. We won big, and then we had Zell Miller, and in '91 we remember the Harris Wofford huge upset.
right.
So hey, it was Paul and I were kind of together, and we were a hot ticket. And once I met Bill Clinton, I just knew like this guy just is on another level. I've never seen anything like it. And I mean, that's how that came about. And it was like a baptism of fire because we obviously we had some issues to deal with early on in the campaign, but I think the experiences that I had prior to that made me a better person to deal with this and try to get through
Mm-hmm.
it.
How do you rate Bill Clinton when you think about all the people with whom you've worked, James, in terms of his political prowess and just as a figure in politics in the 20th century?
I mean, honestly, Babe Ruth, somebody. I mean, it's not fair to compare other people's political skills with Bill Clinton. There's just no one that's been remotely close. I was in my little story. Just I did a lot of work in Argentina, and so I was sitting there. The finance minister at the time was a man named Domingo Cavallo. I was trying to advise. It was sitting in the Sheraton Hotel, what they call Porto Madero, and a manager comes by and he says, Senor Rodriguez, come here. This is Mr. Carville. And he was Bill Clinton's campaign manager, and blah, blah, blah. And of course, they all speak perfect English. And he said, Mr. Carville, about 5 years ago, they had an OES meeting in Buenos Aires, and President Clinton came, and I was greeted him as he came into the hotel. And he said, a couple of 3 years later, they were in Santiago, and the Sheraton people asked me to go over and give him a hand with all the dignitaries. So I'm out front meeting him, and he looks at me and he says, I thought you were in Buenos Aires. What are you doing in Santiago now? And I mean, the guy just remembered like the hotel manager. When you're a president, you go into a hotel, you got to shake hands with 20 people before you get to your room. So I just always, and he was just sort of amazed and kind of shaking his head that the president of the United States remembered him from 3 years ago. And that's so typical. You hear so many stories like that. He just was just stunning in that sense.
He almost had like a photographic memory, didn't he? Just this
Yeah,
ability to
yeah,
remember everything.
he did. And the other thing that he had, there's not a topic that you like. I'm a cradle Catholic. He knows more about Catholicism than I did. Okay, if he came to my house in New Orleans, and my wife is like, art, and he was going through with her, and he knew was talking about almost every art piece we had. Did work in Afghanistan, and they sent me a rug as a payment. He looked at the rug. He started talking about how they make carpets there. I mean, just his body of knowledge is so broad and deep. It just and people say, James, that guy is really smart, isn't he? And I say, you have no idea. I mean, you just, I can't even begin to tell you.
Who do you think is smarter, Hillary or Bill?
Well, I think that Hillary is very smart, and I would say the difference is she's more methodical and thoughtful in preparation, and I think that Bill Clinton is more like ad hoc smart. It's better. He's much better on the fly. He doesn't you can we're going to do a press conference in 10 minutes and this is what we're doing, and he would completely get it. I think that Mrs. Clinton would wants to see what it is, what I mean. She's just more. I think that they're both obviously very, very accomplished and smart people. It's just in a kind of different way. I think he's more of a, like I say, ad hoc kind of smart guy, just kind of there.
Let me ask you about the portions of the doc that feature Mary Madeline, of course, your wife, a Republican strategist. A lot of people are saying she's one of the best parts of this film. And
Yeah.
I'm curious, James, what was it about the two of you that convinced you that she was the one? Because honestly, you still are kind of the odd couple. Let's face it.
Katie, people have been writing for eons about what romance is and trying to explain it, and thank God no one has been able to explain it yet. Right? And Shakespeare, and you got this, and you got sonnets, and you got songs and movies, and I don't know if I call it love at first sight, but I just thought she was just exciting, uh, you know, different, kind of sassy. She had kind of carried herself in a different way. I think she still does. And, when this project started, we didn't envision her being, and I give a lot of credit to the director, Matt Turnhauer, who really, I say, charmed Mary and, got her, she was on the end of the
Comfortable.
project and got her very comfortable. And you did like a 6 hour interview with her. And I do think that I think without her, it would have been a good movie. I think with her, it's honestly a really good movie. And I think that part of the narrative is really essential to the film. And I'm very gratified that she participated in it to the sense that she did. And, it
Do
was
you
more,
think do you think, James, if you met today in the current political climate, you would have ended up together? Because according to a survey, only 21% of today's marriages are mixed politically.
well, it's, you know what? That's one in five. That's not bad. Because, when you meet people, somebody said it would have been really shocking if one of them would have married a tree surgeon from Idaho. So it's not if people in the same business, the people at NBC kind of date the people at CBS, who date the people at ABC, the people that work for JP Morgan run into the people that work for Goldman Sachs, or the people that work at the Dollar General run into people that work at the Dollar Store. Okay, it, for things to happen, the people have to kind of meet, and you always see movie stars marrying each other because they hang out with movie stars.
Right.
So
And and speak the same language and have the same foundational knowledge. But it must have made for some pretty interesting dinner table conversations for your families growing up. I mean, as you were raising your kids.
my kids are, kind of, my daughter, my oldest daughter, is very, very uh, progressive. I mean, and my youngest she's kind of fanatically, she doesn't like Dobbs' decision at all. I mean, but she's more of a social person, and she's like an interior designer. But and my kids never. But my oldest was pretty political and pretty outspoken. My youngest was more social, and we never. I don't think we like encouraged them to be in politics or anything. They obviously knew who we were and what we did for a living, and but they didn't. My youngest particularly is, the person that she most wanted to meet is Michael Smith, the interior designer, who's like the big, she had no interest in meeting George Clooney or Chuck Schumer or anything like that. Okay, it's just they're different and they have their own little lives, and I'm so glad they do. And we try to support them as much as we possibly can. Uh, and I always thought it was. I mean, there's some advantage to your parents being well known. Now, one time we went to Disney World and there were kids, and Jeb Bush was the governor of Florida. And of course, we go in there and somebody greets us, and there's
You
this long
got the
line.
VIP treatment.
Yeah, yeah. So, we go right to the front of the line, and my oldest said, "This is embarrassing." And my youngest said, "Well, you go to the back of the line. We're going to take advantage of it." She decided, yeah, we'll just go to the front of the line anyway. But with that came some good, but some bad. Our house was like people were going in and out of it. They rebelled against it slightly, but I think they've come to appreciate that it was part of their upbringing and just who they are. And uh, but it's not, as you know, being well known. Kids, they're not that much into it sometimes. They
Yeah.
think it hinges on their lives. And you go to dinner and somebody comes up and, oh, James, Eric, can I get a picture? And like, well, what are we doing here? So there's some. To be honest with you, it's more upside than downside, but there is some downside to it.
I can totally relate to everything you're saying. I think my daughter used the same exact words. This is so embarrassing, Mom. But it sure made it a lot easier to go to the rides and see
Right.
everything at Disney World,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
hey, how I'm curious because I haven't seen Mary publicly in quite a while, and how is she feeling about the current state of a party that she's worked so hard for almost her whole career?
Well, I try not to speak for her. But she's not a recluse or anything, but she's really gotten into beekeeping, welding. She stays.
Welding.
Yeah, it was in the movie. She took welding lessons. She's actually pretty good at it. Mary's much better at mechanical things than I am. Uh, and she's very artistic and she does a lot of drawing. Uh, she was one of the few people who was assistant to the president and counsel to the vice president at the same time. I mean, during 9/11, there was a famous picture of Vice President Cheney and Condoleezza Rice and her in the kind of White House basement trying to figure out what to do. And I don't speak for her feelings about anything, but I think it's been difficult because she's like almost a Cheney family member, and you know she's a Republican, and uh, I'd let her speak for herself, but it's not the most comfortable thing in the world for her.